Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Joe Biden's current approval rating and how it's gone up a little bit in the past week and what that means. So we're just going to dive right into this video. So first, I know I'm going to get slander for this because, people are going to say, oh, it only went up by, 2.5%, and, I get that. He was at 40.4%, then it went up by about 2.2%, so it's not like this massive, insane surge, but I think that this means a lot, and I say that because approval rating is an ambiguous metric. I think the majority of voters, whether the Democrats or Republicans or Independents, are going to think of this question differently. For example, there are probably a lot of Democrats who are going to vote for Democrats in the midterms, especially progressives, who are saying, no, I do not approve of Joe Biden right now. I think he's doing a bad job. They're still going to vote for the Democrats in the midterms because, whether they're progressive, they wouldn't vote for Republican, or if they're just a Democrat who's displeased by Biden, they'll probably still vote for Democrats because they want them to maintain control of Congress. And there are, there are some voters like that. It's not a massive share of the vote, but there are a lot of people who disapprove of Joe Biden and are saying I disapprove when they're getting asked these questions, but they're still going to be voting for Democrats in the midterms. There are way more of those. The bottom line for that, I guess, is that there are way more of those voters who disapprove of Biden but are going to vote Democrat than approve of Biden but are going to vote Republican. There are very, very few people who approve of Biden are going to vote Republican, if any. And what we're seeing right now is that this could be a very short surge. And what I mean by that is it's kind of similar to what we saw with Trump when he was in office. So if we take a look at Donald Trump's approval rating when he was president, he was never really that popular. He really never enjoyed super high approval ratings throughout his presidency. He sometimes had stretches where he was, close, his best point ever in his presidency was back at the end of March when COVID first happened, when his approval rating shot up to 46%. Disapproval rating was only 50%. And, what that means is pretty much we kind of saw a rally around the flag effect where, in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the pandemic, no one really knew what was going on. People, just kind of rallied around Trump to support him. And when that happened, his approval surged a bit. In January, is at, similar to where Biden's at right now, 43%. Then it went up to about 46% at its peak right here. And yeah, that was really it. And he only surged right here from March 25th all the way up until about, the first week of April. So he only had 10, 11 days of that approval bump, and that's kind of what we're seeing for Biden right now. That's what I'd compare it to if I had to guess, because his approval was really his approval was awful, or it was at its worst on February 27th. And when we say February 27th in these polls, if I can go back to February 27th, that's likely a poll that came out 2 or 3 days before. So, when we see approval tracking, it's generally 2-3 days behind, maybe 24 hours behind. So, we're this 42.6% number is, it'll be March 7th today, but it'll probably be, that number's probably from March 3rd or something instead of March 4th or March 2nd. So, yeah. Now, I don't, to be honest, think this is going to stay. A 43% approval rating still is not that good. It's still not throw a party level good approval rating. It's actually still quite bad. But it's interesting to see that there are some voters coming back to Biden, or at least these recent surveys have had them coming back, and they've actually been pretty consistent. It would be different, and this has been countless times, it would be different if, every survey has Joe Biden disapproved of, and then there's one poll that has him up 15 that boosts him. Right, no. These surveys, they're not amazing for Joe Biden, they still have him underwater for the most part, but if we take a look at what they're saying, you can see a pretty consistent trend right here, and the trend is that Biden's approval rating is in the mid to high 40s, and so the lowest we've seen is 41% right here from Morning Consult, and then also from YouGov, but we saw better polls. Morning Consult had him at 46 and the 24th. The most recently, Rasmussen, which is not a great pollster. It's given a B, but they had they're they're a Republican internal poll. And they have Biden adjusted 49%, which is pretty good considering it's a GOP internal, because they had Trump's approval like +1, +2 pretty consistently. And they were, in 2018, they had the GOP winning the generic ballot by a point when they lost it by like 8.6. So they're a poll that consistently overestimates Republican support. And like, if you're only down 5 as a Democrat in a Rasmussen poll nationwide, I would not be discouraged by that. But Marist College had him at 48%, ISPOS had him at 42%, YouGov had him at 43%, Morning Consult, as I mentioned, had him at 41%, Rasmussen had him at 43% as well, YouGov had him at 45%, Morning Consult had him at 40%, which is his worst, as did Quinnipiac. YouGov had him at 42%, Morning Consult had him at 43% before, YouGov had him at 41%, and then Morning Consult back up to 46%. So, it's not like we're seeing polls that are like consistently at 41%. Like, there are a few, obviously, but the polls are pretty consistently showing, mid 40s to high 40s. Like, Marist was his best poll, where he was at 48% approval rating, and Marist is the best pollster here. I'm not sure if I believe that Biden has a 48% approval rating right now. If I had to guess, it's probably similar to 43 or 44%. But what that means is that, like I said, you have to account for that boost. Because heading into the midterms, if Joe Biden has a 43% approval on election day, the Democrats will probably run 5, 6, 7, like somewhere in the mid single figures, 5-6%, I'll say, ahead of that nationwide, because there are enough voters out there who disapprove of Joe Biden who are going to vote for Democrats anyways. And like, I can prove this. Like, I won't look at every single approval poll we've seen, because that would take a very long time. But the areas that Biden has lost the most in relative to 2020. So, like, for example, if X demographic voted for him by 25% and then disapproves of him by 3%, that's a 28-point shift against Biden, right? The demographics that he's seen the most shift against him in are likely to be voting Democrat on election day, unless something fundamentally changes. So the two demographics that Biden's lost the most support with are Black voters and Hispanic voters. And Hispanic voters, I think, are very unique depending on the state. Florida and Texas Hispanics are going to vote very differently from California Hispanics. So I'm not going to make a nationwide statement with Hispanic voters, but Black voters vote a little more similarly, I guess I should say. But Black voters in 2020 voted for Biden by, I think, 78% or 79% or something like that. And he's now plus 50 or something, or plus 45 or something. And so, what that means is that Black voters might not like Joe Biden as much as they did on November 3rd, 2020, but it still is likely that they're going to turn out for Democrats if they turn out. So just because Biden is disliked by, that demographic doesn't mean they're going to suddenly switch to voting Republican. Because, if Black voters, if the GOP starts getting a third of the Black vote, then something has fundamentally changed about our political system. But since I don't think that's going to happen, that means that Joe Biden's approval numbers are not going to correlate with the number of votes the Democrats get in 2022. They can tell us a lot about how popular Biden is. They can tell us a lot about how popular the Democratic Party is. But the Democrats, I do not think they're only going to get 43% of the vote on Election Day 2022. Now, to take a look at the generic ballot polling we've seen that kind of reflects this, since Ukraine started, the Democrats have led in every poll, which is interesting. And I think that's partially because of, Trump's comments that really made a lot of people mad about Russia when he called Vladimir Putin a genius for invading Ukraine. And whether that is actually what's happening, I don't know what was really going on in Trump's head when he said that, to be completely honest. But it wasn't good politics, I'll say that, because you never, as a politician running nationwide, you never want to be on the side of Russia, because right now, I think polling we've seen has shown that Russia is the most unpopular they've been since the Reagan era, which is really, really bad, because America was vehemently anti-Russia under Reagan, and because of their invasion of Ukraine, that has made the Russian government as unpopular as ever. And so it would not be good politics for the GOP to tie themselves to Russia. Now, as you can see right here, what we've seen is that the Democratic Party is pretty similar to Biden's approval rating. They're at 42.7%, Biden's at 42.6%, so there is a bit of a correlation there. But where it drops off is that the GOP is 8% behind behind where they are in terms of disapproval rating, meaning that, again, there are a lot of people who disapprove Joe Biden who aren't going to vote for the GOP. Probably vote Democrat. Some might not vote. Some might, vote third party, but they're probably not going to vote for the GOP because there are a lot of progressive voters who are going to say, I might vote Democrat, but I'm definitely not going to vote Republican. And so if those voters turn out for Democrats, they'll probably win a few more races than they would otherwise, but it won't matter, like, an insane amount. And so, what I'm trying to say here is that, the assumption that Democrats are only going to get 43% of the vote on Election Day is kind of bizarre, because if you're making that assumption, you'd have to say that the GOP is getting 45% of the vote, which would make no sense, because neither can be true at the same time, and neither is going to be true either way. The Democrats are extremely likely to get more than 43% of the vote, and the GOP is extremely likely to get more than 45% of the vote. If I had to guess, the Democrats probably get 47, maybe 48% of the vote on Election Day. But I don't know. It's really tough to tell, because forecasting a nationwide generic vote is hard to do, especially when you still have 8 months to go till the election. So yeah. Now, I do want to just briefly to take a look at some, or just not even take a look, I just go over some state polling that we've seen, which should give us a decent view of where we're at right now, I guess. If we look at just all polling from 538, and they changed it, by the way, which is kind of annoying, but all polling we've seen has... Wait, is this just generic ballot? Hold on. The polling we've seen has not really lined up with the Democrats losing the generic ballot by an insane amount. So, Seltzer is, I think, one of the most reliable polls I've ever read. And I say that because in 2020, when I was never on the Biden's going to win Iowa train, but there were some people that were on that train. I was really, I think I briefly had the Iowa Senate races at toss-up, but I knew that Ernst was going to win on Election Day. I had it as leading Republican on Election Day. But, if you remember that race, there was a lot of hype saying, the Democrats are going to sweep Iowa in 2022, that, they're going to win the 3 House races, they're going to win the Senate race, they're going to win the presidency, and then Seltzer comes out, and they've got Ernst and Trump ahead by decent margins, and everyone's like, wait a minute, what? And so, those margins were pretty accurate. I think Trump overperformed Seltzer by a little bit, and Ernst did by, I think, a little bit, but, Seltzer's a really good poll, and I am going to trust them when it comes to Iowa, because they always put out accurate information. Until they're wrong, I'm going to basically almost blindly trust Seltzer, to be completely honest with you. And so, they have Kim Reynolds over Deirdre DeGier in this gubernatorial election. And so, Kim Reynolds is going to win. I say that with full confidence. If she loses, I'll be very, very surprised. But her only being up by 8 is pretty good for Democrats, to be completely honest. The GOP winning Iowa by 8% would line up with what happened in 2020, and the Democrats would gladly take the 2020 electorate, because the 2020 electorate was an electorate that favored Democrats by 4% nationwide, and if that happens again, Democrats are potentially gaining in the Senate and holding the House, and the GOP needs to win the generic ballot this year to win the House and win the Senate. But if it's only one poll, but if the GOP wins Iowa by only 8% in this governor's race, that they should be winning by double that. The GOP should be winning the Iowa governor's race by 14-15%. And if they only win it by 8, it means that they're probably doing worse than expected in other areas, and that the Democrats aren't in as much trouble as we think. I still think the Democrats are in deep trouble, but they're not in an astronomical amount of trouble that they can't recover from. So I think if you take something away from this video, it's that the belief that the Democrats are going to get wiped out in the midterms like 2010, I don't think it's super accurate. Could it happen? Yeah. Is it likely to happen? No. And if you're looking solely at Biden approval rating, you'll get a different picture than what's being painted by the state polls and by the polling data on Trump's approval at his brief surges. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.